Here we have a video pinball console from the 70s. I have been after one of these for years and finally got one a few months ago. It features wood grain finish just like the Atari 2600, pinball style buttons on either side, and a spinner for the paddle game variations. My video pinball machine was well loved, as you can tell from the wood grain wear on the paddle. It also has a handful of buttons on the front, which reset the game, serve the ball, pick which game to play, and also selects the game variations, which gives you different options. The console plays 5 different games, which are hard-coded into the system. This was before CPUs were in wide use. We'll focus on the pinball games and not the breakout variations, and also compare it to the 2600's video pinball game of the same name and see which is better. Video pinball has 2 tables to choose from, and these can be played either in video pinball mode or in breakout style with a paddle. We'll be focusing on the pinball style controls. The first table is the harder of the two. It features 6 drop targets, 3 on each side. These will eventually disappear after a few hits, and to pop them up again, you must turn the 4 top targets the same color, which is harder than it sounds. In the middle of the table is a trap of some sort. The ball will bounce around the inside of this for a couple seconds, and will then be ejected at whatever direction it's traveling. I never did completely figure out at what point the ball comes flying out of this thing. One thing I thought was clever about video pinball is how they did the flippers. They knew that there was no way they'd be able to do realistic flippers with these glorified breakout circuits, so they came up with a substitute: solid blocks which flash on or off when the player hit the appropriate button. It's really incredible how much control this gives you. The ball can be aimed, dribbled, and passed, similar to real pinball, or at least as close to real pinball as you'll get with a Pong machine. If the ball goes below the flippers, you can pop it back up as long as it hasn't drained completely. This simulates the flippers rotating upwards at an angle from their resting position. All this gives you much more control than in Atari's 2600 video pinball, as we're going to see. Now, you might think that you'd be able to keep the ball from draining by spamming the flippers, but this turns out to not be the case. Each flipper can only be raised for a second or so, and unless you hook up an auto-fire switch, you will lose the ball by spamming. But just to make sure, there's also a mode which only lets you use 1 flipper at a time. Now let's look at the second table that video pinball has to offer. Okay, so the second table has the drop targets at the bottom instead of the left and right sides, and after you knock those down, 1 row of those will pop back up when you pass the ball through the U-shaped spinner. That's the thing smack in the center of the table. The table also has a couple of those strange traps, 1 to either side of the spinner, and then a couple bonus rollovers above that. And that pretty much sums up the dedicated video pinball console. There's not much more to these tables. There's no multiplier, there's no bonus when the ball drains, just various targets that give you points when hit. Okay, now let's go over to the Atari 2600 version of video pinball. I didn't play the 2600's video pinball until the 90s. I was visiting my aunt, and we took out the old Atari, and this was among her games. And I have to say, it immediately grabbed me. I don't know if this is due to me being drawn towards all sorts of primitive pinball games, or whether it's that the 2600's video pinball just has something magnetic about it that I haven't been able to put my finger on. It certainly has the bells and whistles covered, and it's always a good challenge trying to get the multiplier up to score. But that said, the game has some issues. First of all, the playfield is as wide as the TV screen, and the flippers are just 2 tiny sprites placed in the middle. The ball spends much more time bouncing around than it does making any contact with these flippers. You don't have anything near the flipper control as the dedicated video pinball console, which is ironic considering that they likely put the flippers in for added realism. However, despite the issues with the flippers and wide playfield, the 2600 video pinball has several advantages over the dedicated machine. For one, you can tilt the machine to nudge the ball to go where you want it to. This makes the wide playfield much more forgivable, since you'll have to watch the ball like a hawk and then nudge it at the exact moment. The nudge feels good. The ball will briefly move toward the direction you press on the stick, then it will resume its trajectory as before. Of course, if you nudge for too long, the machine will tilt and the ball will drain. This version also has deeper scoring. The diamond rollovers increase the bumper value each time you knock all three down. There's a bonus multiplier which increases by going over the Atari logo rollover up to a maximum of 3. Hit it a 4th time and you get an extra ball. There's also a special target which appears briefly for mega points. And finally, it has a plunger to launch the ball, which lets the player attempt to get a multiplier bonus right off the bat. This all sounds good, but it's marred by some really annoying collision bugs. See, the 2600 collisions work by checking whether pixels overlap. Because the ball moves so fast and the targets on the playfield are full of holes in their graphics, it's able to move right through targets at times without the hit registering. Look at this for an example. Watch these targets at the top of the screen. Yeah, that's annoying. And speaking of collision glitches, the dedicated console also seems to run at a higher resolution than the 2600 does. The ball movement in both this and Atari Breakout on the 2600 seemed noticeably choppier. Anyway, I'm not sure which of these I actually prefer when I'm in the mood for some primitive video pinball. The 2600 cartridge is extremely cheap, which puts it into impulse buy territory, and it's a lot of fun despite its flaws. The dedicated console, however, is more of a novelty and is also quite a bit smoother. And of course it comes with a bunch of other games like Breakout, where the cartridge version only has that one pinball table to play. I may cover the dedicated console's other modes in a later review, but for now I'll leave you with a brief montage of the console's additional games.